Okay, your job was to read through the examples 1 through 7 and see what we're learning about. So now we're taking notes. And to start our notes, we need to title it off. So we've got section 3.2, so let's add that to our notes. We also have the title, which is Subtract Integers. And when we first start reading the page, it says the words to subtract an integer, add its additive inverse. Okay, and I think that's very helpful because it tells you literally the rule of what to do when you're subtracting integers. So let's add that in, and with that I would put in our study steps column. Okay, so to subtract an integer, add its additive inverse. You can pause the video at any time to copy it down. So the first thing we need to know is what is an additive integer inverse, right? Because we know what an integer is, we know how to subtract things, we need to know what an additive inverse is. So let's add that in our notes. And all I did was I just Googled it, and I looked up what an additive inverse is. So our first Wikipedia entry says, in math, the additive inverse of a number, a, is the number that, when added to a, yields 0. And that to me is kind of confusing. It's a lot. So when I looked at this picture, right, it says the number is -5. The additive inverse is a +5, and that will give you 0. Okay, and I just kind of looked to see any other definitions they had. So this one, for an example, the additive inverse of 12 is -12. The additive inverse of -3 is 3. The additive inverse of x is -x. And so basically what it's saying is the sum of a number and its additive inverse is 0. And I think that's the most clear definition. So let's add that one into our notes as well. So additive inverse and it says the sum of a number and its additive inverse is 0. And I think it would be helpful if we added a couple examples on that, right? So we have the example for the additive inverse of -3. So we have the number, which is -3, and it says the additive inverse is 3, right? If we add those together, I have 3 negatives, 3 positives. This will equal 0. Oh, the other one, it says the additive inverse of 12 is -12, right? And if we add those together, 12 positives, 12 negatives, these will also make a 0 pair. Okay? So I hope that clears things up with that. All right, so the first example, they have the symbols, right? P minus Q is the same thing as P plus a negative Q, right? Subtracting any number is the same thing as adding its additive inverse, so adding its opposite. Okay, and so we've learned adding integers already. It says when you subtract 7, the result is the same as adding its additive inverse of -7. So 6 minus 7 will get us to -1. And 6 plus a -7 will also get us to a -1. It's the same thing. Okay. Our examples, when we're looking at these, if we wrote our examples, so for example 1, we have 8 minus 13. And it says here are our steps to subtract 13. Just add -13, right? Add the additive inverse. So instead, we rewrite it as 8, and instead of subtracting, we're adding. And instead of my positive 13, this is going to change to a -13, right? And then with that, you can do tiles, you can do number line, you can do decomposition, to find that this will give you a -5. Okay. I think for this one, I would use decomposition for this. So I would break this down into 8 plus, instead of negative 13, I would break this down into negative 8 and negative 5, right? Those two negatives will add into negative 13. And once I make my zero pair here, this will leave me with negative 5. Okay, so until you get used to adding integers together, I would use these methods. Okay, moving on, example 2. And literally the notes that I create for you guys come from these examples. So if you're ever confused, the steps are here to help you. Okay, so next example, we've got negative 10 minus 7, right? And it says, again, to subtract 7, right here, add negative 7. So add the additive inverse. So we keep the first term the same. Instead of subtracting, we can add the additive inverse, or the opposite of this 7 is going to be a negative 7, right? And if I have 10 negatives and then 7 more negatives, we have a total of 17 negatives. Okay, take a second to do the U-tries, and we have the U-tries on the left-hand side of our column, and see what you can do with those. Okay, take a second to see if your U-tries are correct. Pause the video and check your answers. Okay, continuing our notes. So example 3. We have the same processes, right? So seeing these blue steps, and these blue steps are in every single section, they tell you what to do. They help you figure out how to do the problems, right? So I have I have 1 minus a negative 2, and the step tells you, again, with our study steps, to subtract an integer, add its additive inverse, and so it says to subtract negative 2, add positive 2, which is the additive inverse. So I'm going to rewrite it as 1, and instead of subtracting, I'm going to add the additive inverse, which would be a positive 2, right? So now I have 1 plus 2, and 1 plus 2 will equal 3. Okay. Example 4. Here I have negative 10 minus a negative 7. This is a lot, right? And so, again, same steps. To subtract negative 7, you add a positive 7. So I have negative 10. I keep that first term the same. Instead of subtracting, I'm going to add the additive inverse, which is a positive 7. Okay? Now I look at my numbers. I can decompose them if I want and break this 10 down into negative 3 and negative 7. I can see that I could draw tiles if I wanted to, or I can see that negative 10 is just 3 more than what my 7 would be. So I have more negatives than I have positives, and I have 3 more negatives. Okay, take a second, try D, E, and F, and check your answers when you come back. Okay, take a second, check your answers, and we're going to move on to example 5 and 6. Example 5 and 6, it says evaluate x minus y if x equals negative 6 and y equals negative 5. Now you guys have plugged in numbers before in 6th grade, right? So let's rewrite it. Example 5, evaluate x minus y, and we've got x equals negative 6, y equals negative 5. So let's go ahead and plug those in. We have x, which is negative 6, and it says minus y, which is a negative 5, right? And so now here, that's the only extra part you needed to learn. So we replaced x with y with negative 6 and y with negative 5, and then it's the same steps again. To subtract negative 5, add positive 5, right? So add the additive inverse, and then we just evaluate that answer, right? So negative 6 plus a positive 5, and we see that with this there is more negatives then there are positives, and there's one more negative than we have. So this will equal -1. You can draw tiles, you can decompose, either one. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. You take a second, do G, H, and I, and then see if you can figure it out without me doing 2 examples. Okay, again, pause the video, check your answers, and then we're gonna move on to the last one. Okay, last one I wanted to edit on the book. The temperatures on the moon vary from -173 degrees Celsius to 127 degrees Celsius. So this is a big range of temperatures. Find the difference. And so this keyword right here, difference, is an answer to a subtraction problem. So this means subtract. Between the maximum and the minimum, right? So we have the maximum and the minimum. And it says subtract the lower temperature from the higher temperature. A lot of this is just words. It's telling you the maximum minus the minimum, right? So here is the maximum, here is the minimum, the highest and the lowest. Max, min, okay. They estimated beforehand, right, to see what your answer should kind of look like. And then when you actually estimate it, so the difference going from -173 all the way to +127, it's going to be a bigger number. So if we look at the scale, right, so here's 0, here's 127 degrees, here's 173 degrees. And if I want that difference, this whole thing, that means that I'm adding this part, the 127, and this part to the -173, right? So this is talking about that difference, that distance, okay? So again, they have it. So 127, which was the max, minus the minimum, which was -173. And they have the step again, which is the same thing, to subtract -173, add the additive inverse, which would be a +173. And when you add those together, you'll get 300. So the difference between temperatures is 300 degrees Celsius. Okay, try J on your own in your notes to see what you would get for that. So Brenda had a balance of -$52 in her account, right? So she's in debt. The bank charged her a fee of $10 for having a negative balance. Okay, what is her new balance? So if you have a balance, if you're in debt with negative money and they're charging you a fee, what do you think you should owe? Start with that. Okay, so this fee of $10 would be a -$10, or you're subtracting $10, right? So starting out with -52, you're subtracting $10 for that fee, which is the same thing as -52 plus -$10. And your total for this, I guess the answer is here. Her new balance is going to be -$62, right? So now she owes even more because she was in the negative. Okay? Thanks for listening.